So hello, thank you very much for tuning in to this taster session for aspirant master students in IRDR. My name is Myles, I'm one of the PhD students in IRDR, and I'm going to be giving a presentation about space health and disaster risk reduction. To begin with, I'd like to give you a little bit of background about me. I trained as a nurse, specialising in adult care with an interest in emergency care. I did my master's in education and I'm just coming to the end of my second year of PhD in risk and disaster reduction. The topic of my PhD is this concept called prolonged field care, which is a relatively new concept of clinical practice, which takes place pre-hospitally, so before a patient comes to a hospital, and usually in a remote environment that has limited resources and not many options for accessibility. So either to resupply resources or to get patients out of that remote environment. So prolonged field care really is a military healthcare term, and it's come out mostly from recent conflicts in the Middle East, where we had field hospitals such as Camp Bastion. And the model of care was if a patient had a traumatic injury, they would be aeromedically evacuated to that hospital within what was called the golden hour. Now, clearly, Camp Bastion doesn't exist anymore. So the model of healthcare within the military is transitioning towards prolonged field care in some contexts. And future military operations abroad, which doesn't just involve conflict, it can also involve humanitarianism as well. They will be focusing on this model of prolonged field care, which is providing care to people in that remote environment. So it will be small military units that will be deployed overseas, and they'll need to be self-sufficient for the care that they provide. What's interesting is that this is a newly recognized area of practice, and there is some research studies within the military, in the British military and the US military, that are currently ongoing. Things looking at producing algorithms to inform clinical practice, such as the treatment of sepsis in remote environments. The research gap that I've identified, though, is a theoretical foundation to prolonged field care. There isn't one at the moment. So that's the focus of my PhD, is to create this theoretical foundation for what's called prolonged field care. Now, this goes hand in hand with something called remote health, which is another area of clinical practice. And it's essentially providing healthcare and setting up healthcare systems in remote environments. So you can see that they go hand in hand. You may be thinking, asking the question, why is this important? Well, the first point that I put on the slide there is that the UN predicts, despite huge urbanization during this century, there'll still be 3.1 to 3.3 billion people living in a remote environment between the years of 2015 and 2050. That's a huge number of people that require healthcare. However, that number doesn't include people that are traveling to a remote environment, be that for a holiday or for research. And it also doesn't include people that are caught in a temporary remote environment. And that can be caused by disasters induced by natural hazards, or weather events or things like that. So you can see there's a huge number of people that will require remote healthcare. The photo that I put on the screen is a mountainous environment, and a little bit more about my background is I do lots of mountaineering sport, such as climbing. So this is one of the tallest mountains in the UK called Scafell, and if I pan the camera around 180 degrees, you would get Scafell Pike. And that's the tallest mountain in England. So this is a lot of my current clinical practice within the last few years, providing pre-hospital care in environments such as this. So working mostly in a voluntary capacity as an expedition medic, but specialising in nursing care in that environment. And this is a really good example of a really nice summer day in the Lake District, which is a rare occurrence, but it does happen. And you can see from this photo, if I zoom in very slightly, there's a group of people walking up about halfway. And that's because there were two people that were stuck on the face of that mountain. They decided that they would climb it in shorts and trainers, so definitely didn't have the right equipment. They were climbing up quite well, and they got halfway and they realized that from that point, the climbing got a little bit more tricky. And then they also learned that climbing down is a lot more difficult than climbing up. So got stuck. So I was with a friend walking down from Scaffold Pike, started hearing these call for helps. And to long story short, we called Mountain Rescue, and here they are. There is a happy ending. They were brought down completely unharmed, slightly damaged ego, and won't be climbing again in shorts and trainers, hopefully. So a little bit more about prolonged field care. There is some definitions that have been published in the literature. Most cited one is by a gentleman called Sean Keenan from the US, who defines it as pre-hospital care applied beyond doctoral planning times, which means that it's beyond that golden hour time frame. How long is prolonged field care? There isn't actually an answer to that. And there's lots of different contexts that can describe how long care needs to be provided for. And the duration of care in a remote environment means that there's potentially more resources that need to be supplied, but then also the risk of that environment needs to be taken into consideration as well. So if it's a higher risk, higher consequence environment, then the resources need to be taken into consideration there as well. So it's really, really tricky to plan for healthcare in these remote environments. And that's the rationale for why I chose prolonged field care as the topic of my PhD. So I've got a couple of photos here that I'd like to share with you. The first two are quite old now, a few years ago, but these are slightly more current. Now, I mentioned that I enjoy mountaineering, and this is really where my clinical practice is focused on. So this is up in the Scottish Highlands in a Cairngorm National Park. It's obviously in winter, and we were trekking along this path here, and you can see someone down here. And we were going for this large snowbank here. And what we were looking for was a huge collection of snow, and we wanted to practice creating emergency shelters. It was a training expedition that we were doing up in Scotland, and it was really, really good conditions, as you can see. So I took some photos of the things that we were doing. So this is a really quick and simple emergency shelter, and you can see someone testing it out inside. And even though that it is quite cold, at least freezing, if not into minus figures, as soon as you get out of the wind, it's actually quite a nice place to be. It may not feel nice if we suddenly transported there, but once you're out of the wind and the cold and you're in that enclosed environment, you start getting a little bit warmer. You can imagine that you'd be there relatively comfortably for a long period of time if needed. Perhaps you wouldn't want to stay there all night, though. You'd need something a little bit bigger. So we also practiced building snow holes. Snow holes are a huge amount of work. And what happens is that you get a team of people and they dig into the side of the snow. As you can see in this corner of the photo, there's a huge amount of snow that's been taken out of the snowbank. And once you get to the back of the snowbank, you then turn in towards one another, and you're basically creating a room inside the snow. And this really is very exciting. It's a really comfortable way to spend a night in the hills in winter. You're completely out of the wind. It's normally about 5 degrees warmer inside, particularly with a couple of people. And I'm quite tall, I'm 6'4", and I struggle to fit into tents. So building a snow hole is fantastic because I can create it to my own size, which is brilliant. And back to clinical practice, this is a really good way of caring for a patient for a longer period of time, which is slightly different to this previous photo, where it's an emergency shelter. You need to get someone inside, out of the wind, as quickly as possible. But if you're there for a longer period of time, then a snow hole would be much better. So those are some examples of my clinical practice in the UK. But I've also got some experience overseas as well. So this is a photo taken in Iceland, doing some ice climbing on a glacier there. So it's slightly more extreme than Scotland, because there's a permanent glaciers on Iceland. And you can see if there was an injury in this sort of environment, there are different challenges. We've still got the wind and the snow a little bit further up, but on a glacier you have crevasses, which are gaps in the ice, and if somebody slips down there, it's very difficult to get them out. So the point of showing you all these photos is planning for healthcare in these remote environments is incredibly important. And you need to think about what could happen and assess the risk and the consequence of those kinds of conditions. But I've slightly misled you here. A lot of these photos are very good weather conditions, and you can't really see the wind. So what I've got next is a very short clip that shows you what it's like in the real world back in Scotland. And this is the beginning of building and digging out a snow hole. And you can see the weather is slightly different. So really, really challenging conditions. And you can imagine if somebody had hypothermia or twisted an ankle even, creating a little bit of shelter is really, really important. The next slide here is asking the question, why space? What's the connection? I never set out to go into space research, but as I was doing the beginning of my PhD, the literature review and the concept analysis of prolonged field care, space medicine kept coming up. And I was really surprised by that. But when I look back on it now, it does make a lot of sense, because healthcare in space, well, space is just another remote environment, and arguably the remotest environment. There is a counter argument to that, because astronauts on the International Space Station, for example, they have an emergency vehicle that can get them back to planet Earth within about 24 hours. However, if you go to Antarctica over winter, there is very, very limited option for getting people out of Antarctica in those conditions. So you're there for months. And you can imagine planning the resources that are needed there to meet all of patient care needs in that environment. It's incredibly difficult. There's not necessarily a right answer there. There are definitely a few wrong answers, but not necessarily right answers. And the reason for that is it's very difficult to predict what could go wrong in terms of health in those environments. So the connection with space and the clinical practice that I've done and the research that I've done in the past, there are a lot of parallels. And the parallels are planning for that sort of expedition is really, really important. What's slightly different in space is the people that are going to space at the moment are relatively healthy, whereas people that are going to remote environments or caught in remote environments on Earth may not be in as good health as people going to space. There's a few other considerations that we need to take on board when thinking about space medicine, is answering this question, why go to space? It's hugely expensive, and that money could be spent on improving life on Earth as we know it now. But as I'm sure many people know, that NASA is leading a consortium of countries and space agencies with the aim of going to Mars by 2050, which is not actually that long away. So there's a need for those astronauts that will be going to Mars to have sufficient healthcare, and it's another rationale for investigating space medicine. Slightly before that is going to the moon, and the moon is almost like a practice mission to go towards Mars. And again, healthcare on the moon is very different to healthcare on Mars, and even more different than healthcare back on Earth. And we need to look after those people that are going. While we're in space, there's a lot of research that we can be doing which has benefits for life back on Earth. And that really is the key answer to the question, why space? Space gives us a unique environment that we can investigate space medicine and space health, which can benefit the provision of healthcare in remote environments on Earth. I've used the term remote health and I've defined that before. And there is a difference between space medicine and space health. Space medicine focuses on the biological approach to health, the biomedical approach. And that's really how the body biochemically reacts to being in a zero or low gravity environment. And that's really important. We need to understand that. But if we're looking at healthcare from a biomedical perspective, we're very, very focused. Whereas space health looks at the health of someone in space with a much more broad lens. And it's looking at not only the physical health of someone, but the psychological health, religious health, spiritual health, socio-economic health, all the holistic spectrum of health and what that means in space. And that's really, really important. And that's another synergy between the research that I'm doing in my PhD and the research that we're doing within the Space Health Risks Research Group within IRDR. Another benefit of investigating health in space is slightly futuristic, but it's not so far in advance as it used to be, is looking at technology and how that can benefit life on Earth as well. GPS is a really good example and highlights the importance of technology in healthcare, providing it in remote environments. Telemedicine is also vitally important, and that's really catalysed the improvement of trauma care, both in the UK and abroad as well. Being able to bring high-level experts to the field without actually physically being there is significantly important, because a field medic may be very experienced generalist pre-hospital practitioner, but usually as a healthcare practitioner, we'd be on the end of the phone or next door to a consultant in a hospital. In a remote environment on Earth, and indeed in space, that's very, very unlikely that expertise would be so closely to hand. So telemedicine is vitally important because it enables us to be able to talk to consultants and other specialist members of the multidisciplinary team within healthcare and get their advice on what care needs to be provided. However, as we venture further into space, so away from the moon and towards Mars, telemedicine becomes less reliable. It takes a radio signal approximately 22 minutes to get from Mars back to Earth. So if there was an accident on Mars in 2050 and they needed some consultant advice, a radio signal would take 22 minutes. Once it reaches planet Earth, the consultants would then have to decide what the best course of action is, and then relay that message back, which is another 22 minutes. So you can see already we've eaten into at least 44 minutes of that golden hour, which I spoke about earlier on. So that model of healthcare doesn't fit at all with deep space exploration. What we're doing in the Space Health Risks Research Group is investigating how the risks to health can be mitigated. And that's another link with my PhD research, which is about how do you train and prepare practitioners to provide healthcare in those remote environments. And that theoretical foundation is almost like a touchstone that people can refer to and inform their practice. So the Space Health Risk Research Group, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about that. It's a relatively new research group and has attracted quite a lot of interest. We have 2 active research studies with a couple more in the pipeline. If I just go back to the PowerPoint there. 2 active research studies. The first one is in a couple of weeks, and it's a symposium, which is a little bit like a conference, with the same title as this taster lecture, Space Health and Disaster Risk Reduction. What we're doing during this symposium is we're theoretically exploring how a healthcare practitioner can meet all of the patient's needs during the exploration of another planetary body, like the moon or like Mars. The rationale for that focus is going back to what I was explaining within a hospital environment. Other practitioners with their expertise are within arm's reach or close by. Going to space, we don't have that connection. So that means a healthcare practitioner, be that person a nurse, a doctor, or an allied health professional, or even a first aider or a medic, will need to be able to adapt their practice to meet all of the patient's needs within that environment. So we're going to theoretically explore that. And through the symposium, we've got a variety of breakout rooms to examine that through from different perspectives, including global health, military healthcare systems, civilian healthcare systems, anthropology, including medical anthropology and biosocial anthropology, the disaster sciences, of course, as well. The symposium will last all day, and we're going to break into those different rooms. It's freely available, and tickets you can book for free via the IRDR events webpage. And throughout the day, we'll also be hearing from colleagues from around the world with different focuses on space health and disaster risk reduction. One, for example, being the Canadian Space Health Risk Research Network. They're a similar research group to us that are also investigating space health and the benefits for life on Earth, particularly in remote environments. I'll be hearing that from them towards the end of the symposium. And we're also really lucky to have an ex-astronaut that's coming to speak at the symposium, again from Canada, who's Dr. Robert Thirsk, who is also a medical doctor. So he will be describing the current way that medical care is provided within space, and then also some aspirations of how that could look in the future. The aim of the symposium will be to produce a consensus paper on how an interdisciplinary healthcare practitioner could provide healthcare during the exploration of another planetary body. However, that's just a consensus paper. And there's a link between the second study, which you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. We're going to test that consensus, and we're going to test it within an analog environment. An analog is a simulated space mission. There are lots of different analogs that take place. You may have seen parabolic flights, where a plane flies up into the sky and comes down very quickly, and it gives the simulation of zero gravity. You may also have seen centrifuges, where people are put in a spinning machine, which represents more than one gravity measurement. Over in Europe and in the US, there are some analog centers that over a longer period of time simulate a space mission. For example, the Austrian Space Forum are just preparing for their next analog mission, which will be looking at the way that research can be safely conducted, particularly on the Mars environment. What's really interesting is there's never been an analog research mission that involves humans in the UK. There has been some robotic analog missions within the UK, but humans has never been done before. So within the Space Health Risk Research Group, we're going to conduct the first human analog space research mission, which will be a pilot mission taking place next spring. The location, we're keeping it almost secret, but we can say that it's a remote, uninhabited island in Scotland, which we have permission to use for a week. The analog mission will focus on 2 days, and there will be approximately 6 analog astronauts. And those analog astronauts will be healthcare practitioners from a variety of different backgrounds. That includes doctors, nurses, allied health professionals, and medics, as I mentioned earlier on, which is another link for the symposium. Another activity during the symposium, which links with the analog mission, is we're going to be collecting ideas for realistic healthcare scenarios that could take place during the exploration of another planetary body. And those case studies we're going to enact during the analog mission next spring on the island in Scotland. The analog astronauts will be required to treat the patients that have a variety of different conditions, both physically and psychologically. And will need to provide that prolonged care and meet all of the patient's needs. So those case studies will take place for 8 hours at least, and there'll be 3 spread over those 2 days. So the first one will be during the day on a Saturday, The second case study will be overnight from Saturday to Sunday, and the third one will be Sunday day. Now, clearly, somebody isn't going to be awake for 24 hours because that wouldn't help anyone. So part of the pre-deployment training for these analog astronauts will be to develop a system on how they can put together a shift pattern to make sure that the patient is always being cared for and their needs are being met, but then also their own needs in terms of sleep, rest, and recovery are being met as well in that challenging environment of an uninhabited Scottish island. So that's going to be really challenging. And the output of the Analogue mission, or one of the studies, will be an evaluation of that consensus that happened during the symposium. There are a few other studies as well that are going to be taking place during the Analogue mission. And what we're hoping is that this pilot Analogue mission will lay the foundation for future Analogue missions that take place within the UK that have a much higher fidelity. Fidelity is really important within Analogue missions, and it means how realistic is that simulation. So the things that we're simulating during that mission are the remoteness, being on an uninhabited Scottish island that's only accessible by boat. We're also simulating the limited amount of resources. So the Analogue astronauts will have access to resources, healthcare resources, and they will not be resupplied throughout the whole Analogue mission. So what they'll need to do is to decide what resources to use when, but towards the beginning of the Analogue mission, they won't know what case studies will be happening next. So it's going to be really difficult to make those clinical decisions on what resources to use for those simulated case studies. What we're also simulating is the topography, so the lay of the land. As you can see from this photo, this is a mountainous environment in Scotland, and you could imagine that would look like Mars. The island that we're going to will not look like Mars. There's lots of heather there, unless there is heather tucked away on Mars somewhere. But the rolling hills and the mountains of this environment are very similar to some locations of the Moon and Mars. The Analogue astronauts will have definitely not been to this island before because it's uninhabited and not many people go there at all. So the final thing that we'll be simulating is this exploration of another planetary body. But what they'll be doing in reality is exploring a Scottish island that they've never been to before. So as I said, it's really important when designing analog space missions to identify what those simulations that you're creating are. So this is a low to medium fidelity analog mission, and what we're hoping to do in the future is to design and lead higher fidelity analog missions that have multiple research studies and are simulating a lot more characteristics of space. What is also important with analog missions is to not focus purely on the research. We also have a duty of care to the crew and the Analogue mission astronauts that are going on this mission. So what we've done is we've clearly distinguished between the in-simulation activities of this Analogue mission and the in-reality considerations that we need to think about as well. So one really simple example is we have a doctor that will be coming with us on the Analogue mission, and their role is specifically to provide care in reality. We also have at least 2 mountain leaders who are qualified to guide people within the UK in summer conditions. And those 2 mountain leaders, in collaboration with the doctor, will have complete autonomy to make a decision about whether it's safe to continue conducting research or to pause research and to bring everyone back to the base camp that we've identified on the island. And that's really important to be able to conduct safe research in a high risk environment such as a remote island in Scotland. We also have we're really lucky to have a large number of people that have joined the research group recently, colleagues from different universities in the UK, but then also abroad as well. So we're also beginning to think about our next focus after this mission that takes place in spring. So what I would say is if you're interested in the work that we're doing in the Space Health Risk Research Group, is to keep in touch with us on our website. And then also feel free to email us as well. And I've provided the email address online on the screen there. Thank you very much for listening, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that people have. Thank you.